and strategies that they've developed, philosophies they've developed to cope. Because everyone has made choices during COVID across the entire spectrum of people. And as we know from the news, many of our ultra-Orthodox friends and family and ex-friends and ex-family and community have made very, very specific choices. And a very common misnomer about leaving ultra-Orthodoxy is that once you leave, you've made some kind of clean break. That magazine article that I wrote that Lonnie mentioned, I had to have interviewed more than 100 people, and I cannot tell you of one clean break I heard of. I'll tell you also, in my experience, I have 3 sisters and a mother all living within a few blocks of each other in Crown Heights, and we are facing the same challenges. So I'm done talking, and now I'm going to introduce our 2 panelists. And then the way tonight is going to work is we are going to hear first Beatrice Weber's story, and then we're going to hear from Zalman Newfield, who himself is a footstepper and is also an expert on this panel. Though it's hard for me to say that Beatrice is not also an expert, and you'll know that once you hear her story. I will introduce them both now. Beatrice Weber was born and raised in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community and was married when she was 18 without a high school diploma. After 22 years and 10 children, she left her marriage and eventually the community with her 4 youngest children. She is currently an interspiritual minister, writer, speaker, and coach. She writes about her experiences in the community and empowers people to connect with their own inner greatness to create self-determined and joyful lives. You could find more about her at beatriceweber.com and her work on the website Medium if you search her name. I'll be repeating ways to get in touch with both of our panelists after this. Our other panelist, Zalman Newfield, PhD. Dr. Newfield was raised Lubavitch and attended yeshivas and participated in Lubavitch outreach all over the world. He since has earned a degree in psychology from Brooklyn College and a PhD in sociology from NYU, my alma mater. And he is an assistant professor of sociology at the Borough of Manhattan Community College for City University. In the spring, when absolutely nothing else was going on, he released the book, Degrees of Separation, Identity Formation While Leaving Ultra-Orthodox Judaism. You could find that book on Amazon by searching his name or the title, or you'll go to his website, zalmannewfield.com. Again, I will repeat that later. And now I am going to speak to Beatrice, who now lives in Brooklyn with her 2 youngest children and has been talking a lot about talking and thinking and experiencing the challenges for being in a liminal in-between space, such as the one we are now. Beatrice?
Yeah, hello everybody, and thank you for hosting this, Taffy, and good to see everybody here. Even though I can't see you guys, I know you're all out there. Yeah, so I actually live in Williamsburg, as you mentioned, in Brooklyn, right in the midst of the Hasidic community. One of my children attends a yeshiva in the Hasidic community, and I shop and I walk and I live here. I live here, haven't gone anywhere. So very much agree with the idea that there's no clean break, and I'm tied in as many ways, especially, as a mother of so many children. So yeah, I mean, it plays itself out in so many different ways. And, one of the things that was hitting me is that I shop locally, so I still shop in the same grocery and I walk in there and I, wear my leggings and in the summer, my tank top, and I just walk, I just walk in and do my thing because I just, this is my life and this is where I live. And I wear a mask because that's what I do when I go in closed places with people. And like, it hit me how like wearing that mask is what signifies me as being different. you know, it took me a while till I was comfortable walking around like that, you know, wearing whatever I was wearing. But like the idea that I'm wearing a mask is what transforms me from being not part of the community. It just was something that really hit me, and it, you know, made me think about like how, I guess, the cultural differences and the decisions that people make. So that's, you know, just something that I think signifies in a nutshell the, you know, the huge difference.
So what you're saying is that the people that you interact with on a normal daily basis in the community are kind of uniformly not wearing masks.
Oh yeah.
And not taking COVID precautions.
Yeah, you know, there was a couple of days that there was a sign in Yiddish on the front of the store saying, you know, everybody wear masks. There are people coming around to check. So that lasted for a few days. So yes, I think that's pretty much just the way it is, you know, especially, I guess, in stores that are owned by people from the community. There's a sense of kind of, this is ours, we're comfortable here, we can do what we feel, and we don't feel those precautions are necessary. We'll do it maybe outside of the community where we need to, but not inside. Yeah, that's pretty, it's rare for me to see anybody wearing a mask or anything. Yeah, and then like how it plays out for me, very, very real, is I have a 8-year-old son that's in a school that I know has no precautions. So I kept him home in March. You know, school closed, they closed the school, and they were kind of doing these hourly phone calls for about 6 weeks. You know, they won't do any Zoom calls because people ostensibly don't have the internet. So the kids would call in for an hour or two. That stopped after about 6 weeks. They weren't very direct with me, with telling me that school was starting, but the phone call stopped. So I kind of got a sense there's something else going on. You know,
wow, that's how you found out?
Yeah, that's how I found out. I assumed there was a grapevine where other mothers were told, and I was kind of kept out because they're a little cautious with me because, you know, as some of you may know, I filed a lawsuit against the school a year ago about there's no education. So they know that I'm not kind of their typical, obviously, run-of-the-mill parents, so they're a little more cautious. They did call me up and kind of ask me what I thought of the idea of the kids getting together a little bit, you know, so they were kind of feeling out my thoughts.
And what did you say? Did you feel like you had to censor yourself?
Yes. I always feel like I have to censor.
I mean, beyond censoring yourself, but did you feel like you had to say that you were more open to it?
I'm sorry?
Did you feel like you had to say you were more open to it than you actually?
No, I just was like, well, I don't think it's a good idea right now. How about we wait another few weeks? I kind of stayed very very neutral. I didn't want to come down really hard. Mm-hmm. Just because, well, I guess, you know, I'm in family court, so every word I say kind of gets repeated back. So I'm always careful. You know, more recently, I did make a decision to send him back in September. And because, again, there's no virtual option, you know, so I did make a decision to send him back in September. About 2 weeks ago, I think just 2 weeks ago, he wasn't feeling well. So I went to the school to pick him up, and I got there. And as much as I knew to really go there and see that there's absolutely no precautions, you know, there was nobody wearing a mask. The kids were all crowded together around a table in a small classroom. It was just shocking. And, you know, him not feeling well. So I was like, that's it. It was reported back to me that the school claimed that I created a scene. You know, and kind of that is like, well, first of all, if I would have created a scene, I think that would have been fine because I think any parent would have done that. And I actually recently wrote a piece that's going to be published shortly about like what it means for me to trust my maternal instincts and mm-hmm. stand up for my children and disregard what the rules or expectations are, because for many years, I did not follow what my maternal instincts told me, but rather followed what the rules were. You know, at the risk of sometimes not doing what was in the best interest of my children. But for me, part of my leaving the community and my healing process and kind of finding my own self-determined life was about, yes, connecting with that. And it was like, he's sick. Nobody was picking up the phone at school. I'm going to go pick him up. So it's tricky, you know, and of course, having a family court hearing a couple of days ago and being called on it. You know, and
was that what the hearing was about? This is kind of ongoing negotiation between you and your husband.
Correct. So it came up as an issue, you know, and I had just gotten like a report that they weren't in compliance, but it's like, and he's not feeling well. But I wonder, like, what if he had been feeling well? Would the judge have said, okay, he has to go to school? I mean, back, you know, just in the holiday, Sukkot, you know, at the beginning of October, he ended up staying there for the second half of the holiday because he had, you know, he met with his lawyer and told his lawyer he wants to be there for the second days because his nephews are all coming. And the lawyer explained to the court that he wants to participate in the dances with his father. Now, if anybody of you know what a Hasidic dance on Simchat Torah looks like, there are like 100 people crowded into a small room, and they are all holding hands or on each other's shoulders and dancing. And it's actually a beautiful celebration. But during COVID, I don't know, you know, and my son described what that was like for him to go into a building that was closed off in the front and darkened, you know, all the windows were darkened, and then to go to the back of the building and do that. So, you know, from a legal point of view, from a personal point of view, it's just so tricky. I'm not able to make all the choices for him. You know, I'm not. And I do need to interact with the community, you know, so like grappling with all of that.
How do you reconcile it at night? I know that, like, when someone at my kid's school annoys me on a much lesser level than life safety, I'm like playing it over and over at night in bed. Like, how do you make peace in your head for how this is? Do you think to yourself, oh, this is temporary, my kids will only be in school for so long? Do you think about the statistics about COVID and children? Do you worry for your personal safety, or are you just like a rage machine like I would be?
I think at this point in my life, it's come down to living day to day, making the best choice every day, you know, because I don't know what will be. Grateful. I had the experience of leaving and having my children with me. I know not all parents have that, you know, so he's 8. He's lived with me for, since he was 1.5 years, for 6.5 years since I left. Grateful for every day. I hope that will continue. But I am always thinking a step ahead and being very, very cautious what I say and what I do and how I say it, because, you know, he goes to school there, you know, and even now he's attending the hourly classes, right? That's, you know, they set it for him, they call him an hour a day, and he's attending that. Yeah. It's not, I think I don't look at it as like make peace in the bigger sense of it. It's like, today's okay. You know, today we're well. Today's okay. What can I do tomorrow to keep things okay?
Do you feel like you have empathy for, there are a lot of people, I'm not taking questions yet, and I want everybody to know that we are going to take questions for the last 15 minutes of this. But there are a lot of questions about, like, why you think, I'm not going to ask you to tell us why you think people aren't wearing masks, because you already did a great job of suggesting something I'd never considered before, that this is our kind of our home and our extended, like, that's for them and this is for us. Kind of like a secular first name, like, so they understand it, right? But I do wonder if you are able to find any empathy for, like, if that is one of your ways of coping, or if you have a different method.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're doing it to be reckless or bad. I really, really don't. It's a different way of functioning. And I don't know if it's okay to say this here, but I am an interspiritual minister, so I guess I can talk about that. But there are many very religious people that have adopted that attitude, right? The attitude of there are the religious and spiritual things are more important. So if we pray, right, if we daven and if we learn and study, that's going to help us. You know, if God wants us to live, we'll live no matter what.
Right.
And I sincerely believe that plays a big role. I know, you know, I don't want to go into my older children a lot, but you did mention I have 10 children. And one of my older children I know was in school until the sheriffs, several weeks into like the lockdown here in New York City, in upstate New York, until the sheriffs actually came and closed it down. And I know he came home and he was like a hero. right? It's like the Hanukkah story, right? The people that were learning no matter what.
Yeah.
And I know that 10 years ago, I would have done the same thing. Like I would have, been the woman that would have kind of taken that position and, kind of really stood up for that and espoused that view and been very strong in saying, listen, our studying and our, going to daven 3 times a day is so super important that it supersedes all of this. And would have found theories to believe it, because let's be honest, there are other people besides for religious people that are not following, the guidelines, right? So there are always something to go back on. So I definitely get it, because I was it, I lived it, and I had those views. So it's not coming from maliciousness. I mean, what does bother me is the lack of transparency about it. And there are rules, right? And there are guidelines, and just listen to the rules, like that bothers me. Like you don't believe it, you don't think it's important, but there's a rule, listen to it, follow the rules. Don't think that like you always need to figure out a way out of it. But in the general concept of believing that this doesn't need to be followed, it's not coming from a bad place or malicious place or even a reckless place. It's just coming from a very different way of looking at the world.
Right. And another, like just one last question. So your other child is in public school. I want to make a very clear difference that the schools we're talking about are yeshivas, sort of immersion Jewish schools for those who don't know those words, but a school that is kind of all day Jewish studies versus public school. How does your other child reconcile it with you? What is parenting like for two people having these incredibly different experiences?
Yeah, I mean, my son at the beginning had a very hard time because, he's exposed to information, and we were speaking about
in the yeshiva. And
the one in the yeshiva, when he saw what was going on in the community, he kept on telling me, he was like, they're crazy. Like he had a really hard time as a child, knowing what precautions were happening in the regular world, right? And hearing from me what was going on. Like he himself had a really hard time reconciling that. Right. And, obviously the difference, I mean, everybody knows public schools just closed down like today, right? Again. So, she's been virtual. It's just a different world. Again, as I mentioned, like you go out, right? So he barely wears a mask, but we go on the train. So, I sometimes take him on the train. So, we're wearing the mask then. And it's a big deal. It's almost like, there's the frum world, right? The Orthodox, the Hasidic world. And then there's the other world, which honestly he deals with on a daily basis, not only around the COVID issue, but in general, like how to reconcile all of that and how to make sense of all of that. And, he's a smart kid, he's figuring it out, but that's definitely an ongoing issue for him for sure.
Right. Before we go to Zalman, I want to ask like one sort of a more esoteric question, which is, how do you stay in touch, the kind of most essential part of yourself, when you have to be in all of these different roles at all of these different times, which is a kind of a general footstepper question, but especially right now when this requires so much interaction and so much worry. Yeah. What are your, and especially since you're a coach and a minister, it's a good question to ask you, what are your best grounding rituals for staying focused and remembering that this too shall pass, even though it's taking a really long time?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. I mean, I definitely use meditation as a way to start off my day. I can't say I do it every day, but I do it in most part of the day. And one thing, a practice that I actually started at the beginning of COVID, that's been very powerful to me. I live pretty close to the projects, and the projects is basically the only grass around because I live in Bed-Stuy, Williamsburg, right? So kind of at that border. So there are the projects up the block. Okay. So that there's a patch of grass, and I do almost daily, where I'll walk to that patch of grass, and it's somehow gated in, and there's a tree there, and I have a little puppy. So I usually take my dog with me, and I take off my shoes and I literally step on the ground. And then I have this kind of little ritual where I'm holding onto the tree and walking all around. And that grounding and connecting to the earth somehow, yes, reminds me, the earth has been here for forever, will be here, like it's gonna be okay.
Wow, literal grounding. I was
Yes.
not expecting literal grounding. Well, thank you. What a beautiful answer. And of course, we're going to come back to you when we have questions. But I am going to switch over. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch over and say, hello, Dr. Newfield.
Hi there. So wonderful
Zalman.
to be with all of you.
I'm in the habit of saying doctor, but hello, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with everyone and thinking about these important questions.
Okay, so you come to us both as a former member of the community and also somebody who is clearly steeped in these questions, since you just wrote a book that, I'm sorry, as a fellow author, I will say the title of it again, Degrees of Separation, Identity Formation While Leaving Ultra-Orthodox Judaism. Tell us what your observations have been, both of your ties still to the community and what they are, please, and also what your kind of grander research professorial view is.
Sure. So let's start with the grander research professorial part. So as you mentioned, the title of my book, Degrees of Separation, was really trying to highlight exactly the point that you made initially, Taffy, which is that when people leave the Hasidic or ultra-Orthodox community, they're not completely disconnected from it. Contrary to what many outsiders and some scholars and even some insiders think happens, oh, they leave, they go fry, they totally disconnect, and then, it's over and done with. And the reality, of course, is much more complex. And that's what I spend a good deal of the book trying to outline. But it's especially relevant to the current situation with Corona, because all of these kinds of ties, both emotional, psychological ties, as well as the kind of concrete social connections to people's families and to their original community, become fault lines now during Corona. Right. So Beatrice already spoke about the fact that as someone who has children that are still attending the Hasidic yeshivas, the Hasidic schools, now suddenly she is in all sorts of complicated positions, because she wants to both protect her own child, but also is required to ensure that the child continue to attend this particular school. And this is not uncommon. We know when the child custody arrangements are made, they often, for people who, when you have a situation where one parent is leaving the Hasidic community and the other one is staying, you often have stipulations from the court that certain things must be in place the way that they were before the divorce, such as the schools that the children attend. So you have people who are in Beatrice's situation. You also have people who are simply connected to their families and still manage to maintain a loving relationship with their family. But what are they supposed to do when their family won't follow the most basic aspects of the Corona social distancing guidelines? And I could tell you from personal experience, I had a sister who recently I grew up in the Lubavitch community in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. And I have a sister who recently got married. And even though I begged them, thank you. I begged them not to make the wedding at this time, and other relatives who are not Orthodox did the same, but for various reasons, they decided to go ahead with it. And not only that, but they made the wedding essentially very similar to how they would have done it before Corona. So the wedding was smaller, but they still had the dancing and the dinner indoors, and no one was wearing masks. As Beatrice said, the only people who were wearing masks essentially were my own family, my wife and my children. And it's absolutely the case that when as someone from outside the community who comes to visit the Crown Heights or other Hasidic neighborhoods, if you're wearing a mask, you're immediately identified as an outsider, that you're really not or no longer a part of the community. And
also like an insurgent, right? Like someone who's like trying to make a point.
Yes, it does. We haven't mentioned it, and it's a whole nother topic, but the politicization of the masks and more generally the response to Corona. So certainly when someone shows up with a mask, they're not only seen as an outsider, but they're also a Democrat, a liberal, a radical, a socialist, who knows?
An apikoros.
An apikoros, no doubt.
Heretic.
A heretic. Exactly. So all of these things kind of get piled on. And I should tell you that, so when we went, again, we were all wearing masks. We did not go into the indoor.
You and your family.
Wife and two children. Only
who are not from the community.
Who are not from,
we're not married. I just want to make that clear.
Yes, my wife is not from the community. My children are, have never been, a part of the Lubavitch community.
Really weird.
and we prepped them. I mean, they go to public school here in New Jersey. They always wear masks in school. All their friends wear masks. They go to the park. Everyone wears masks, and we prep them. When we go to Crown Heights, they're not going to wear masks. And of course, my daughter say, "Well, why not?" I say, "Well, that's a complicated question, but the bottom line is they're not going to be wearing masks." And I could just mention that when we went for the wedding, and I saw a few Lubavitchers in Crown Heights walking around holding the masks, but not actually putting them on their face.
It's a step.
So right. So I tried to inspire them to.
It's not a step. Don't.
No, that it really doesn't help. But the point is, I tried to inspire them to wear their masks, and I was trying to think of what would be a good way to connect with the Lubavitchers to convince them. So I told them that the masks are like tefillin; they only work if you put them on. And I thought that this would really speak to Lubavitchers, where in a language that they would understand. So of course they all laughed. But none of them, put on the masks.
You tried.
I tried. And then someone else, another time I had another line, someone came over to me and they said, "Oh, what is this? Purim over here, the holiday, like a carnival holiday, people walking around wearing masks." And I said, "Look, we're just trying to prevent Tisha B'Av. We're just trying to prevent a national disaster from all of the corona." But the point is that they really are not wearing these masks and doing the other things that are required. But again, for OTDs, quote unquote, people who are leaving the ultra-Orthodox community because of their connections to the community, whether it's through their family, through friends, they want to stay in touch, they want to be connected, but they're faced with all of these tremendous obstacles because the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community, are for the most part, or to a great extent, not following these guidelines. The other thing that I should mention is on a sort of emotional, psychological level that it's very painful because for people who left the community, some of these people have been saying for years, there are problems with the ultra-Orthodox community. Beatrice mentioned the issue of the lack of secular education in ultra-Orthodox schools. There's many other issues of sexual abuse and all sorts of other problems that the community faces. And people who have left the community have often tried to highlight these issues and try to bring about awareness to ultimately achieve some redress of these issues. Now that Corona has hit and it's caused tremendous devastation, including in the ultra-Orthodox community, where there are many levayas, many funerals, many people passing away, on the one hand, people who left might feel this inclination to say, "Look, I told you so. This is exactly what I was telling you. These communities have real problems. They need to address these internal problems." And at the same time, given the enormity of the tragedy, no one who's connected to these communities wants to gloat about the problems. They're too devastated by the losses, by the people who are sick. I have a friend, someone who I went to yeshiva with for years, who came down with corona and was actually in the hospital for months. And every time I got a text message saying, please say Tehillim, please say extra Psalms to try to bring about a miraculous recovery, I would cry. I mean, it was so devastating. And now, thankfully, he seems to be doing better, but still, it's an extremely excruciatingly slow process of recovery. And watching all of this, again, no one is in a position or in a mood to gloat or to highlight how this conforms to the kinds of problems that people have been talking about for years. Everyone is focused on trying to help these communities and the people associated with them.
Wow, that is really, really intense, and that is very generous, because I'm in a real I told you so kind of way. I'm sorry to say, but I will admit it in front of just these hundreds of people. I know that in my family, I get answers, and these are like, lest everyone here, I have my family's in Chabad, they're all college educated. And it's been very frustrating for me. And I've heard everything from, grandparents saying, I've lived long enough, it's okay, like, it's okay, to, we already had COVID in March, it's okay, like, to the point where I don't really understand it. And I guess my question to you, and it's interesting to hear you talk so sensibly about this, does knowing all of the things you know about why people do what they do, is it at all a help to you when you see your family like that? Is it like, does your knowledge and your understanding create a comfort to you watching a train go off the rails that you can't stop, even though everyone could stop it?
Right. So I hear the question, and the truth is, it's hard for me to distinguish the sociologist in me from just the person who's gone through all of my life experiences. And so I would say, I do feel a kind of comfort, not to be, too blasé about this, because it is a horrific situation, but I do feel, I think, much calmer than, for instance, some of my non-Orthodox relatives, people who are never Orthodox, right. And they are sort of following with horror what my family and more generally the Hasidic community is doing. And I get these frantic emails, and I do feel sort of more at peace that, well, yes, they're following all sorts of totally predictable behavior patterns. And like, we should not be surprised. And quite frankly, people who know the ultra-Orthodox community and know, on a deep level how they operate, we're not surprised by these egregious forms of behavior. So I think that there is a part of the sociologist and the knowledge of communal behaviors. I think that does give me some kind of peace. And at the same time, on a personal level, as someone who left the Lubavitch community, who has a lot of disagreements with the Lubavitch community, with their philosophy, with the Hasidic or ultra-Orthodox way of life more generally, when I've sort of come to peace that, yes, there are people who are going to be doing things that I really, find repugnant, and I simply cannot control them. The old thing about the only one you could change is yourself. I think that does give me a kind of peace, where other people seem, from the sort of more secular or liberal circles, have a kind of missionary zeal that they feel, well, we're going to get these people, we're going to get them to change somehow. And I've come to the place where, you have to just accept that people are going to live a different kind of lifestyle. That doesn't mean that we should, they should get them off the hook. Obviously, people do need to follow the rules, and there are laws and there are rules in place. And people who cover up the windows of the yeshiva and then allow the kids to come in the back, or people who make weddings and turn off the lights in the front of the hall, and then have shut the music when the sheriff comes to check if people are having gatherings. Obviously, those things are wrong, and if they're violating the law, then they need to be dealt with. But on a personal level, I've come to the place that my job is not to try to, to change these people's behavior. Every person is responsible for their own behavior, and certainly there should be an accountability on an individual and on a communal level for people who misbehave. But that's not my job to insert myself here.
I admire that, because I guess I'm 45 years old and I'm still shocked when they changed the tablecloth the second time during a Pesach Seder. So I feel like my ability to be surprised is keeping me young. I'll ask one question because it keeps coming up. I know I'm not supposed to be looking at the chat module, but the question, first of all, I want to say to everybody that we use the mechanics of when to use Hasidic and when to use ultra-Orthodox are very complicated and just not important right now. We're basically generally talking about the same people when we're talking about that, just for right now. But the second thing I want to ask is about Pekuach Nefesh and all of the laws that people rightfully are bringing up in the chat module about there are so many parts of the Talmud. There are so many, Torah Chai Behem, all of the things that say whatever you have to do, saving a life is the most important. I want to go right to questions after this, but what do you think happened to those things, Zalman?
Sure. So again, I don't want to sound too complacent. Maybe sociology has made me complacent in some way, but again, as a scholar, I understand that no religion, is a purely a pure sort of manifestation of the rules that are found in some text. Every religion has a history of interpreting and reinterpreting the text, and in reconciling contradictory passages from different texts, and also contradictions between texts and the external reality. I mean, this is what religions do all the time, every day of the week. So of course it's true that there are many, rabbinic or ancient sources for the idea of, focusing on life, the preservation of life. It says that the Torah is Eitz Chaim Hi. It's a tree of life. It's supposed to give people life. It's supposed to sustain life, both in the literal and in the figurative sense. And certainly there are many laws that people could even violate or desecrate the Shabbat laws in order to preserve a life. So obviously this is an important part of the Jewish tradition. At the same time, there are many other important principles. And I think when it comes to this whole issue of the masks and social distancing, I really think that people have to understand that ultra-Orthodox communities in general, a key part of what makes them, quote unquote, ultra-Orthodox, as opposed to something like a modern Orthodox community, is this idea, their relationship to modernity itself. That essentially these communities developed in Europe as a response to the modern era. And they basically said, unlike the communities that developed into Reform Judaism, conservative, capital C Judaism, and so on, and even modern Orthodox Judaism, that said, well, we're going to try to find some kind of modus vivendi with modernity. We're going to go to college. We're going to be connected to the outside world, but we're going to have, in some way, preserve what is important or sacred about Judaism. The ultra-Orthodox community, their response was a rejection of modernity. Now, obviously, this is a very complicated thing, and in many ways, the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox community are still deeply connected to modernity. Obviously, their use of the internet in order to do business and survive financially, their use of much of medical technology, so there are many ways that they're connected to modernity. Obviously, at the same time, there is a bedrock rejection of the idea of secular knowledge, of secular authority. And when we look at how the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox community is responding, it makes a lot more sense if you put it into this larger ideological context.
Very, very interesting. Both of you I'm still as confused as ever, but I'm comforted that both of you have shared your experience. And now, Beatrice, I'm going to ask you to please unmute and introducing CEO Lani, who is now going to volley me some questions to punt out.
Yeah, I mean, can people hear me okay? I had to switch to my phone in the middle because we lost internet. Good times. So I think one of the things I want to lift up, because there's a lot of questions coming in, and looking at the thread behind a lot of the questions, it seems to me like many of us are concerned and scared and want to know what we could do. And so there are questions about, like, are there any moderate voices still within the community who are concerned about public health that could be amplified? Or could we influence any doctors who are in the community? So I think that there's a theme underneath this, which is like, what could we all here do to help?
Right. And is that a question that you want answered, or do you want to?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
At the core of the thread of a lot of questions is like, how could people possibly potentially take action? Do the panelists have any ideas about that? Like the moderate voices.
Beatrice, do you have an answer for that?
No, I wish.
All right, then we'll go to Zalman. I was going to say that, but I didn't want to just make any assumptions because I got no answers. Zalman, what's the answer to that question? What can we do to help?
Just so you know, when you get a PhD, you don't get the answers to all questions. But I was really hoping that Beatrice would have this. I mean, I think, look, again, I don't want to be, I'm not trying to sound complacent. And I think that people who are energized and trying, you know, and desire to make a positive contribution, I think that's commendable, and they should certainly think of ways of doing that. At the same time, I think it is really important to understand that for people who are not part of the ultra-Orthodox community, they really have to understand their outsider status, that they are not, you know, the people in these communities, you know, and it's very good to try to be an ally and want to help people. But this is a delicate situation, because the truth is that the ultra-Orthodox community, related to what I was just talking about in terms of their kind of ideological position, is this idea that they are under threat. They are under threat from secularism. They are under threat from the government. And everything that de Blasio and some others who have written op-eds about this issue, everything that they've done has just contributed to this narrative that we have to hunker down, that no one could save us but us. We have to take care of ourselves. Everyone seeks to hurt us or to make fun of us, to embarrass us. And so when people, to be perfectly honest, I was approached by a major newspaper and asked to write an op-ed about this, and I declined. And the reason why I declined is because I didn't want to have one more person who left the Hasidic community writing an op-ed saying, oh, look, this community is terrible. Here's the million ways that they're violating, the social distancing guidelines. I didn't feel that was a productive thing for me to do. And that's why, just to reiterate, Taffy, what you said at the outset of this conversation is not about how to criticize the ultra-Orthodox community. It's very purposefully, and I thought very delicately framed as how could we help and how could we better understand the position of people who have left the ultra-Orthodox community. Of course, because people who leave the ultra-Orthodox community are still connected to it, so inevitably we're also talking about the ultra-Orthodox community, but that's not the focus here. Because
I agree, and I'll answer also myself that you're doing a lot by being here, right? Like you're doing a lot by being here and understanding. And then you have a choice of where to make donations. If you want to go to my new GoFundMe, which is a billboard that says masks are like tefillin, they only work if you use them, but it's in Yiddish. I'll be setting that up right after this. Lani, what's our next question?
In the vein,
Beatrice, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean,
donate to my GoFundMe.
and this is a little off topic, but I will say that I personally know people in the community that are in part of the community that try to make changes. It's very difficult once there is like a communal consensus of there's a way to go to make those changes, even if you're part of the community, even if you're observant, to speak up with an opposing view. It comes with like a really high price to pay.
And
so
it's also very true. I just want to say that, like, just lest you think this is something that only affects this community, you know, we knew that smoking was really bad. And in the 90s, people were still smoking all the time because we decided that that wasn't, like, let's all just remember that as a community, a global community, we make decisions about what to prioritize, and as baffling as it is to us right now. But again, that's not the focus. Thank you for that, Beatrice. Thank you for reminding us, Zalman. Lonnie, please.
Well, I want to lift up the voices of some folks here from our community of leavers, seekers, and finders, if you will, and ask a question for Zalman, and Beatrice. This person asks, for someone who is estranged from family, how are other OTD Footsteps members dealing with death and grief from religious family members passing?
Oh, wow. First of all, I'm so sorry at the implication there that you're grieving as well. Beatrice and then Zalman.
I can relate to that question, as I am estranged from a lot of my family members. As far as I know, I've not heard of any deaths in my close family. I just can't imagine the pain. You know, I just can't even imagine what that's like for somebody to go through that.
Right.
You know, whenever there's estrangement and then there's a death, it's painful. But then when we have the extra of the complicated feelings around how that may have happened and what may have happened, I just can't imagine. And I hope, you know, taking good care of ourselves, like that's all we can do now.
Right. And doing things like finding people to talk to, right? And seeking out the kind of psychological and emotional help that we know, because nobody should be dealing with grief by themselves. Zalman?
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree that these are, it's obviously, it's always devastating when a loved one or someone we're connected to passes away. And when it happens during Corona, and there's a possibility that the reason why they passed away was from Corona. And then, of course, this relates to all sorts of questions like, had they been more careful with these regulations, could this have been prevented, and this could add tremendous psychological burden to, dealing with the grief. And I again, it may be difficult, it may be impossible to sort of shut that off, but as much as possible to just try to focus on the person who passed away and the tragedy of that, rather than kind of allowing it to connect to these larger potentially unanswerable, or certainly uncontrollable factors. I think that, that might help. And as you said, I think always trying to seek professional guidance and professional support to deal with the healing process is always a good thing to do.
That's a very good answer. I do want to remind everybody that there is a Q&A module that is on the bottom of the screen. A lot of you are in the chat asking questions, and Lonnie is checking the Q&A module for it. So please, if you have a question, make sure to put it in there. Lonnie, do you want to hit us with your next question?
Yes. I think that people are curious how people are navigating being in touch with friends and family who are back in the community, and how to just hold that during a space and time that is hard to be in touch with them. And people spoke to that a little bit, but there are more questions coming in about that as well.
I would like to know, can you clarify how to make peace with it, or how to interact with them actually?
Interpret it as you will. I think I I'm also reading the question from my phone.
Okay.
But I think like what the space is around just how to deal with the challenges of wanting to be in touch with family and it being hard to do that during
That's
this
a
time.
great question. My nephew had a bar mitzvah last weekend and we didn't go. And it was a tragedy to me. And I had a lot of crying over it. And I had a lot of my family thought that I'm so uptight. And I would love to know from either of you what it is that you think that people could do when they are longing for the people in their lives that they want to be with, either on an occasion or because they just miss them. But the mental Olympics or the social Olympics of how do I interact with you is just too great and it's too fraught.
Yeah. And I think I would just say one thing, and I picked up and I saw one of the someone posted in the chat about the challenges of being empathetic with someone who you feel is so, acting in such an egregious way, and again, I hear that, I really do. And it can be excruciatingly painful to both want to be connected to people that you love so dearly, and at the same time being so outraged. How could you possibly, be acting in such an irresponsible way, whether again, having a simcha, a family celebration in violation of these rules, and or, just living a life that does not comport with these rules. And then, how could you go over to this family member's house, just to visit? And I don't know that I don't believe that there's any magic solution. There's no magic wand that could be waved here and could somehow resolve all of these problems. But I do think that it's important to separate the love or feeling that people have for their family with the kind of judgment about their behavior. And obviously this is something that's relevant throughout life. How could we both love people and try not to judge them for whatever things they do that we think are wrong?
That's the work.
Right, that's the work. And there's a tremendous amount of psychotherapists who are making a living trying to help people deal with this. But I think that this is important to do in order to maintain any kind of relationship with this family.
Yeah.
Beatrice, I want to ask you a question specifically. This question that just came up. Sorry, Lonnie, I'm going to just take over because we're running out of time. I love this question because it's so practical. If you have friends and family in the community and you do want to see them, what are the ways that you could set the rules in place and say to somebody like, I want to see you, but I'm not going to hug you, and it's going to be outside and it's going to be with a mask and you have to stay 6 feet away, but I still want to see you. What are your strategies for handling this, if you have handled it effectively?
Yeah, I haven't. Again, as I mentioned, I'm estranged from most of my family, so it hasn't really come up as a
Okay.
It hasn't come up as an issue. I will say just that the idea of missing people is something I think that everybody is going through right now.
Yeah.
I think the difference is that in the community, and I think even for people that leave the community, you're used to somehow getting together in a certain way. That's so much part of the way of life, right? Like in the community, again, part of life, it's so communal, right? And definitely, the men getting together 3 times a day for prayer. But even women, like you get together there's a lot of that in-person connection that is really hard now.
Right.
So I don't think that it's so dissimilar from what most of the people are dealing with today in terms of missing your loved ones, right? It's so many people.
Right. It isn't
alone.
It's a good point.
Perhaps, you don't have access to the same technology, so that, makes it a little harder. But in principle, I don't think it's any different than anybody else, except you're seeing them getting together and you can't go there. But the not going there, I think, is universal. Like we're all dealing with that, right?
That's a great answer. You're right. The answer is we're all trying to handle that. And also, by the way, outside of the religious community, we all have slightly different rules about everything. I am going to start the closing process. Is that?
Yeah. Yes, I think we should.
I would like
Taffy.
I would like to just say one thing to it.
Yeah.
That keeps coming up in the chat and the question module about, well, how can we understand more why the community is doing this? Again, that's not what this panel is about, but I will tell you that I've been a journalist for a long time, and people who, especially after the Footsteps story that I wrote, who know my history, I've been reached out to by nearly every news organization you can imagine for tips on how to talk to people in the community so that they could find it out. And I just want to tell you, it's hard, it's ongoing, and it is the work right now. So, Lonnie, is it okay if I say thank you to our panelists here? I'm going to say thank you so much to Beatrice Weber for sharing your story. Beatrice, again, can be found at her website, beatriceweber, WEBER.com. And her work also appears on Medium, but I bet you could find it all through beatriceweber.com. And to Zalman Newfield, whose book, Degrees of Separation, Identity Formation While Leaving Ultra-Orthodox Judaism, will answer many more of these questions. And I would like to say on my own behalf that one of the ways that I managed to feel less frustrated about all of this, for everybody outside of the exiters who are listening, writing a large check to Footsteps really, really helps me with that. So if you're inclined to do that, I think you should, a check of any size. But I do want to wish everybody well right now. And I want to thank you both for your stories and your expertise. And I want to thank you, Footsteps, for having me and asking me to do this.
And I want to thank Taffy. Thank you, Taffy. We did not ask you to say that. And I also want to say we have plenty of members and exiters who support us as well. But I actually, as people are jumping off.
I was not that.
I know. As people are jumping off, I want to just frame and reframe that, like, we decided to do a panel that bears witness to the liminal space that our members are in as COVID is raging in ultra-Orthodox communities and begins to spike again in New York. It's been a hard time. It will continue to be a hard time. And those who are leaving are being hit in very particular ways, some of which are financial and some of which have to do with mental health. But there's this other piece of the puzzle that we wanted to fill in tonight about how hard it is to make the decision to change your life and then be pulled back in by a huge public health just explosion, and the piece where the community has decided not to follow the guidelines that the broader public tends to be in line with. So we really did want to stand and bear witness. We know that there's a lot of anger and concern out there, and we get that, and we really want to uphold our members who are doing amazing jobs at taking care of themselves and their families and loved ones and each other. So Taffy, thank you for having a wonderful conversation with Zalman and Beatrice tonight. And I think we're going to close up. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks so much, everyone. Be well.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here. Be well.